Microphone check. Testing microphone. Good evening, everyone. Everybody. Good. Moments. And we'll go through the tutorial. We're going to get started with the tutorial for the as-is. Just fixing some audio problems so that we can make sure the audio is perfect throughout the stream as I go over the contract. Just give me a moment here and we should be good. Okay, good evening everyone. For today's class, we're going to be going over the residential as-is contract for sale and purchase. This is the most standard contract for sale and purchase used in the state of Florida for residential properties. I usually always advise to use the as-is contract, whether you're buying or selling property. There are other contracts like the standard residential contract for sale and purchase, but this is the more common one that's used, is the as-is. So we're going to be going over this one today. Might be moving pretty quickly, but if there's any questions throughout the class, feel free to type in the chat to let me know and I could go over the details. So without further ado, we'll begin here in just a moment. Okay, let me go ahead and zoom in here a little bit to make this a little bit easier to see. It's a bit much. I think that's about good right there. So let's go ahead and get started. Filling out this contract isn't too difficult, but you know, it can be a little confusing for the first time doing it, or if you haven't done it in a while. It did change recently in the past year, I believe, so this is the updated video for 2023 as of today. So let's go ahead and begin. So the contract here, you start off with the buyer and the seller. We're just going to use some placeholder names. So let's say today the buyer or the seller is John Doe. And for the buyer, we're just going to say, let's put a name of like Billy Bob. Placeholder names there. If a company owns the property, you could put the company name there. If it's a trust, you put the full trust name that's buying or selling the property. That's a little bit different if you're dealing with that. If there's multiple owners, you just put them with like a comma, or you could put an and mark there. So it's like John Doe, Susan Doe, something like that. If there's 3 owners, you could continue doing that. Sometimes I put an and sign in between them. Doesn't really matter much, but sometimes I do get these questions, so it may seem a little redundant filling this out here, but it's good to go over it because some people do have questions about it and get a little confused. Same thing if it's a company name, you just write the full company name, or the trust fund if it's in like a living trust. So for right now, let's just leave it like this, the seller and buyer. The next part, it may seem kind of silly, but I'm going to go over it because I see it all the time, is you want to write the full street address, city, and zip code. I've seen it too many times where realtors would just put the street address and they won't put the city and they won't put the zip code. It's unacceptable. You really should be putting the street address, city, and zip code. So let's just say it's 123 Happy Street. Just put a placeholder name there. Miami, Florida, 23456. So I've seen realtors like leave out the zip code, so they wouldn't have this there. Something they leave out the state, and they'll just put this there. I mean, it does say the county in Florida down here, but it's asking for the city and zip, so at least write the city. You don't have to write the state, I suppose, but just to be perfect, I always write just the full address, how you would write it, like if you're mailing an envelope to the property or if you're writing it in anywhere else. So write the full address. I write the full street name, the numbers, the city, the state, and the zip code. I know it seems a little silly, but just a lot of realtors make this mistake. Write the whole thing. Then down here, you can write it what county it's located in. Miami-Dade, County, Florida. If it's in another county, let's say Duval County if you're in Jacksonville, or Orange County if you're in Orlando, you just write the county name there. And then the property tax ID, you get that from the public records. There is a very helpful website that you can use to look up the public records. You could also probably just type into Google like Miami-Dade, Florida property appraiser, and then you can search the property in there to get the tax ID number. And the tax ID number is usually long. Sometimes it has like dashes in it. So you'll get that from the property appraiser website, and there's a different property appraiser for each county within the state of Florida. So you'll have to go to their particular website. If you're looking for like in Jacksonville, Duval County, you could probably just type in Google Duval County property appraiser Jacksonville, and you'll find it. So write the full street address, city, state, zip, the county it's located in, and then the tax ID number. And then the legal description. The legal description is also within the property appraiser. You'll get it in the same place where you get the tax ID number. It's on that page somewhere. You probably, for each county, they're all different, so you have to navigate the website a little differently and look for this information. Sometimes it's easily found. Sometimes you have to go through the page and search for it a little bit. But the legal description is usually it's usually pretty long. Sometimes it's so long you can't even fit it inside this box here, and you'll have to add it in like an addendum or down in the additional terms or somewhere else. But common legal description, you'll see something like section like 78, block 42, something like that. And then sometimes they'll have like the community name, like something along the lines like that. It's different for every property, so I wouldn't worry too much about this. When you're looking in the property appraiser website, you will see the legal description somewhere. Sometimes it's easier to find than others, but you just put the legal description here. Simple enough. So moving along with the as-is contract, you can fill this in if there's other personal property included that's not mentioned in this paragraph. This paragraph usually covers the basics, such as you can see here, the range, oven, refrigerator, dishwasher, disposal, ceiling fans, light fixtures, drapery rods, blinds, window treatments, smoke detectors, garage door openers, thermostats, doorbells, television wall mounts. You can read through the rest of this paragraph, but it includes most of the things that are included in a typical sale. Mailbox keys, shutter and storm protection items if there is. There's a lot of hurricanes in Florida, so sometimes that comes included with the home. If there is other things, you could put it down here. Maybe there's a little bit of furniture that's being included into the sale. You could write it down here. If it's a large furniture list that's being included into the sale, you could create a separate furniture addendum and start itemizing everything and take pictures of everything to make it more transparent. But that's what you would put into here. And if there's items excluded into purchase, maybe there's the paintings that are in the home that they're going to be excluded and removed from the home. You could put that in here. Just so it's very transparent and everyone understands. So the next part here is we talk about the purchase price. So the purchase price, you just write the exact number here. Let's say the property is selling for $500,000. We'll go ahead and write 500,000 and put that in there. And that's how you should write it. With the, if there's, you could write it like this, or you could just write it without the cent sign back here. It doesn't really matter. The program, Form Simplicity, fills it in automatically like that. So the next part is the escrow deposit. How much is being held in escrow? You write here whatever is negotiated between the parties. You could do 1% of the purchase contract, 5%, 10%. It really is negotiable. There's no really set amount. It really just depends. So for this contract, let's just say we're going to put down $15,000 as an initial escrow deposit. And then this part here, it does say you could leave things blank, and a lot of realtors do. Me personally, I don't like to leave anything blank, so there's no discrepancies. So I like to fill in everything that I do. The most common one to click is the second box, double I here. So is the escrow deposit is to be made within, and then you can leave this blank for 3 days. But like I said, I don't like to leave anything blank, so I like to write the number 3 in there. If you want to change this number, you can. You can make it so that they have to make the escrow deposit in 2 days, 1 day, 5 days, 10 days. It's really up to you and the parties. It does say here standard for 3, so that's usually where I leave it at, 2 to 3. Sometimes I usually go between 1 day to 3 days, but that's just my personal and professional opinion and how I handle the escrow deposits. In some rare situations and scenarios, you might need to take a little bit longer or change it to 5 days. That is up to you and the parties involved. For now, we're going to leave it at 3. I usually never click accompanies the offer. I've done that several times, but you can if you want to. If they're going to make the escrow deposit that same day, if this all gets executed in the morning and you want to make sure that escrow deposit is made before the close of business that day, you could click this as well. But for now, we're just going to say it's to be made within 3 days. The escrow agent name down here, you could put, if your real estate broker holds the escrow funds, you could put down here the name of the brokerage, the address, email, phone number, and fax. A lot of times I always have the title company hold the escrow funds, so you could just write their information here. Let's just say there's a title company, just put a placeholder name, you put their address here. And then, phone number, email address, fax number if they have it. I'm just going to leave those blank, but you'll fill them in as needed. You just put usually the title company information here or the real estate brokerage information if they're holding the escrow deposit. Also, an attorney can hold escrow deposit as well, so you could have the attorney's information written here. The next part is part B, an additional deposit to be delivered to the escrow agent. If there's going to be an additional deposit, if left blank, then 10 days. Let's say after 15 days, you're going to have an additional escrow deposit made. You'd write 15 here. Maybe there's another $10,000 going into the deposit. You could leave this blank, or you could fill it in if you want an additional escrow deposit to be made. So that's one easy way to do it. Let's just say for this contract that there's going to be an additional escrow deposit. The financing amount, you put this here if the buyer is obtaining financing. The program Form Simplicity, it does it automatically, so you could just put like 20% and it'll automatically adjust the balance to close down here. If you're not using Form Simplicity, you'd have to do it by hand, but the program does it for us here automatically. Then there's an other section. You could leave this blank, or you could just write non-applicable here if there's no other deposits. Maybe you could do this for the additional deposit after 15 days. Then maybe you could do a third deposit. You could write it down here, or if there's some other type of terms and conditions concerning the purchase price and a dollar amount, you could also put it in here of what's going to be done. But for now, we're going to leave that blank, so we'll just write non-applicable here, leave it blank, and let's say the financing amount is 20%, so it does all the calculations for us, and this is the balance to close after the deposits have been made. So this is the balance that the buyer needs to bring to the closing in order to close the, have the funds to close the sale. The next part here is time for acceptance, the effective date. Now this is pretty important. I see a lot of realtors, they just leave this blank. They don't fill it out, or they fill it out and then everyone executes the contract on a date after this date. That's not the right way to do this. I'm going to tell you the right way to do it is you put a date here. So let's say today is the 27th. So that means that all parties need to sign this document by the 27th. Now, when you send this offer over, if you're working with the buyer and you want to give the seller some time to accept it, you probably want to give them 2-3 days. So if they do sign it, this isn't void the contract, because you want the dates to match up. So let's say you want to give them until like the 30th. You give them until the 30th of September. So that means everyone needs to sign this contract by the 30th. If everyone doesn't sign the contract by the 30th, or let's say the seller ends up signing it on the 2nd of October, this contract's no good. You have to update the effective date. So that's something that's really important. Don't leave this blank. You want to fill it in, and you want to make sure there's an applicable amount of time, or an ample amount of time, so that everyone can sign it before it expires. So let's say it's going to be September 30th. Moving on to the next page is the closing date. The closing date here, you want to put, the way I like to write it is, let's say we're having a closing date of November 1st. I like to write it as on or before November 1st, or you can put that there, on or before. So if the loan is clear to close sooner, you could close before November 1st. This is just how I like to personally write it, is on or before a specific date. So if you're giving the buyer, let's say 30 days to obtain financing, this is how I write it, because maybe they could get financing in 24 days and everyone wants to close sooner, then you could go ahead and do that. You don't have to really write on or before, but I always like to, just to make it as transparent as possible. This part here, you could check this box if the property is subject to lease or occupancy after closing. I'm not going to get into too much detail with that. That's probably enough for a category for another video, so we're going to skip that for now on. If you're a member of our brokerage, you could go ahead and contact me about that if you have further questions, but I'm not going to go into too much detail concerning that right now. Assignability, once again, you could leave this blank. I always like to check the second box, so that sometimes, let's say, for example, the buyer wants to put the property in a company name. They want to create maybe a trust or an LLC to put the property in for liability purposes. They could click the second box here, so they could assign the contract but not be released from liability, so that they could, sign this contract in their name. Once they know the closing is going to happen, they could go create an entity and then assign the contract into the entity name that they created, such as their company or their living trust fund, so that the property can be placed into a different placeholder or an entity for liability purposes, or for whatever purposes that the buyer has. You could also usually check the may not assign this contract if they don't plan to do that. I usually never check mark the top box here, which is they may assign the contract unless they're going to be assigning it and going to be released from liability. There are specific situations where you do check this box depending on the nature of the deal. For the most cases, you usually check the second or third box, but that doesn't mean that you won't have a situation where you'll be checking the first box. It just depends. The next part here is financing. If the buyer is financing, you check mark part B. If it's a cash deal, you just check mark part A, and that's it. It's a cash deal with no financing contingency. Let's say for this particular contract, we wrote up at the top it was 20% financing, so we check mark part B. How many days do they need to obtain financing? Usually 30 to 45 days. I always like to ask if it's conventional or FHA to ask for 45 days, just in case you need it. But sometimes sellers, they say we only want to give you 30, in which case you just have to make sure the buyers are really moving fast and getting all their documentation submitted for underwriting, because there's always some type of problem, some type of document that the underwriting needs, and it could take a little longer than 30 days. Not always. If the buyers are on top of what they got to do and they submit everything in a timely manner, you could probably get financing in 20 to 25 days, maybe even less. But 30 to 45 days is a safe bet for most buyers, especially if they're not really familiar with the whole purchasing process and they're very busy. Sometimes it could take a while to submit documentation and they need those extra days. but this is fully negotiable. It could be 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. Most common I usually put here is 30 to 45, so let's put 45. Let's say it's a conventional loan, we'll check mark conventional. If the buyer is going to maybe get conventional or FHA, you could click both. If it's a VA, you could click that. If it's other, maybe they're doing hard money lending, you could write that and put hard money, something like that for getting a hard money lender. But let's say for this particular deal, it's going to be conventional or FHA. Is it adjustable, fixed or adjustable? A lot of times it's usually fixed, but if it's an adjustable loan, you can put that in there. Then these parts here, you could leave blank or you could fill them in. A lot of times I just fill them in or just leave them blank. It doesn't really matter too much here because it has the auto fill in here. You know, left blank, the prevailing rate based on the buyer's creditworthiness. I usually leave this one blank, and the second one I'll just fill it in with 30 or 45, but it doesn't matter too much. You could fill this in as you deem necessary. This is usually how I leave it. Same thing with down here. I usually don't leave things blank. But just because I don't leave things blank doesn't mean that you can't, especially if you use an e-signature. Every time it's e-signed, it has the ID on those documents, so you know nobody could write something in there and change anything on you. You have the document that has the saved ID number from an e-sign program, so you could leave these blank. It really, if it has these things next to it where it says if left blank then 5, you don't really need to fill it in. I just like to fill them in, but that's just a personal preference of mine. Like for up here, I'm going to leave this blank because it's going to be based on the prevailing rate based on buyer's creditworthiness. So you don't have to worry too much about those parts. Just make sure you understand and your client understands what they're filling in and what it means by leaving blank in the days that they're required to do something. So moving along here, I think that's almost it for filling in. They have the closing costs here on paragraph 9. You could write anything other if the buyer is going to be paying anything. Let's say your brokerage is going to charge a transaction fee. You could put that down here. So let's say the buyer owes Nizz Realty Inc. a transaction fee. You could put something down here like $3.99. Something like that. So the buyer, it has a $399 transaction fee to Nizz Realty Inc. That's where you could write that information here. I've seen some realtors write it in the additional terms. Me personally, I like to write it here. And this paragraph here looks a little bit cleaner, and it's clearly stated on the contract of what the transaction fee is. That's usually what I use the other for, but you could put something else there if there's another cost that's going on there. So just depends. Let's say for this deal, there's a $3.99 transaction fee to Nizz Realty Inc. Title evidence and insurance. Like I said, I don't like to leave it blank. I just put 15 there, 15 to 20, but you could leave it blank. It's up to you at your sole discretion. It does have that section here, if left blank, so you're good there. The next part here, a lot of realtors skip this part. This is another important part of the video, so if you're watching this, I definitely suggest you take notes and fill in this part. You have to check mark one of these boxes. If it's in Miami-Dade or Broward, you could check this third box, but usually I always check the first or the second box. Even if the property's in Miami-Dade or Broward, I usually check the first or second box. And this is fully negotiable. This is between the parties. A lot of times the seller will designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's policy and charges. Sometimes the buyer should designate the closing agent and pays for the owner's policy and charges. It just depends on what the parties agree upon. I've heard a lot of realtors and individuals say it's supposed to be one or the other always, but that's not the case. It's whatever you agree upon and you check one of these boxes. It's one or the other. So if you're a member of our brokerage, you could contact us for further explanation on which one is best for your particular deal. But the only thing that I'll say about this is that there's no specifically right one. It just depends on what's negotiated and what the parties are going to agree upon. You could do one or the other, or the third one if you're in Miami-Dade or Broward. It really just depends on what's negotiated. For this, let's just check mark box 1 that the seller is going to designate and pay for the owner's policy and charges. Home warranty, if there is one, you click buyer or seller. or if there's not, you just click non-applicable. If there's no home warranty situation going on, that's usually what I click, but if you have a different situation, you could check mark buyer or seller and fill in the information as needed. But you're going to check mark non-applicable and just move on. You could also fill these in with non-applicable. It doesn't really matter too much. Once you check mark this, you could just move on. Special assessments. You could leave this blank, or you could check mark one of these boxes. Me personally, if I'm a buyer, unless I'm agreeing to take upon the special assessments after I purchase the property, I like to check mark part B, that the seller shall pay in full or prior to closing any assessments owed to the public body to be prepaid. So if there's some type of special assessments or lien on the property, they're going to pay off all of that. But unless there's pre-negotiated terms, then I would be check marking box A, and the buyer would be taking over the installments after closing. This, once again, just depends on what's negotiated between the parties. It really just depends. For the purposes of this video, let's just say the seller is going to pay off anything in full. Now, there is a part down here, if neither box is checked, then option A shall be deemed selected. You got to make sure if you skip over this and leave it blank, and there's a special assessment on the property, and you left this blank, that the buyer is going to be required to take over these special assessments. So if you don't make sure your buyer understands that before they just go through and sign this, if that is the case and you're leaving it blank and just skipping over this. A lot of the times when I'm purchasing properties, I like to check mark B, just in case there is something, the seller is going to have to pay that off prior to closing. They should know about that if there is something on the property, and that's why I check mark part B. But once again, this is to be negotiated between the parties, so make sure the realtors and the clients understand this here, and check mark the appropriate one for your deal. Next paragraphs are disclosures. We're just going to go through that. You could leave this blank or fill it in if you need more days for the flood zone. More disclosures. There's nothing to fill in here. You could read through this at your discretion. The next part to fill in is paragraph 12, the property inspection. You could leave it blank, and that'll give 15 days to have your due diligence period to inspect the property. If you need more time, you can write more time in here. If they want less time, you write less time in here. It's completely negotiable. You put whatever time frame is to be negotiated between the parties. For the purposes of this video, let's say it's going to be 17 days, just to put something different there. So that's it for the property inspection. The buyer has 17 days to inspect the property and back out if they have a problem with the property. After 17 days, the inspection period is over and they're pretty much committed to moving forward. Once again, more disclosures throughout the contract. You can read through this. I'm not going to read through these paragraphs with you. There's nothing to fill in here as a realtor, so we're just going to go through this. There's really nothing else to fill in. It's just a lot of disclosures, things to read. That's pretty much it from there. The last part is paragraph 19 down here, the addendums. You can fill out the addendums here. If there's a condo rider within the community, click the condo rider one and fill out the condo rider addendum to accompany this contract. If it's in a homeowners association, you click the homeowners association and accompany it with this contract. If there's FHA or VA financing, let's say it's a VA loan, you click this and you include the addendum for FHA and VA financing. If the property is built in prior to 1978, you click this box here and include a lead paint disclosure and include that. Maybe there's a sale of the buyer's property, you include that addendum and click this here. One thing that's very popular nowadays is the seller's disclosure, so I always click the other box and write seller's disclosure. And you'll include the seller's disclosure with the property. Anything that you need in here, there's pretty much almost every single addendum you check mark here. Licensee versus property interest addendum. If the buyer holds a real estate license or the seller holds a real estate license, you'd click that and have them fill out that addendum disclosing that they hold a license. Pre-closing occupancy, post-closing occupancy, you check mark these boxes. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some of the most common things that you'll see with property that's being accompanied with the contract, these addendums. So you'll have to use the ones that is necessary and required. Some of these are required for the property that you're selling. If the property is in a homeowners association, you need the homeowners association addendum. If the property is built in the 70s or 60s prior to 1978, you need a lead paint disclosure. If one of the buyer or sellers holds a real estate license, you should be using the licensee property interest addendum to disclose that. So some of these things are necessary, just depends on your deal. If you're a member of our brokerage, you can contact us, of course, and we'll be able to guide you further. So we're going to leave this here like this and move on to the last page, the additional terms. I'm not going to get into any additional terms and what you can write. There's always additional terms that sometimes get written into contracts and put together. That's something that if you're a member of our brokerage, we'll discuss in detail with you, depending on the nature of your deal. For the purposes of this class and this stream video, I'm not going to get into any additional terms. I'm going to keep that more confidential and go on a client-by-client basis for what they need and looking to do. So I'm going to skip over that and go down to the last pages here, where the buyers sign and date along with the sellers. You can put the addresses here for purposes of notice. And then you also, the last thing you want to do, I see this left blank quite often too, is you want to fill in the realtor information. The listing broker, you put the listing brokerage name there. So let's say the listing broker is Nizz Realty Inc. The listing sales associate, you put the, if you're the agent, you put the agent's name here as who's handling the deal. So you could put something like that there, or whatever the name would be. So that would be the listing associate. And then you put the other down here, the company name of the cooperating broker who's representing the buyer. Let's say Nizz Realty is representing both sides. Then you could put the Nizz Realty on both sides here. I've seen a lot of realtors, they'll also write their commission down here. You can do that. Let's say, let's say you put a name here, and then you could write, let's say 3%. You could put, I see realtors do that. It doesn't hurt. You could put something like that if you want to, just to clarify the commission amount. Usually it's in the MLS, or we have other ways that we recommend our realtors to disclose how much the commission is going to be. But really the main purpose of this here is to put the information of the listing brokerage and the sales associate name. So that's it for the sales contract. Let's see here. There's a comment that I missed. Do you pre-write all of this, or do you go through it with the buyer? I usually pre-write it, Robert. I usually pre-write it and then go over it with the buyer after I pre-write it. A lot of the times I do ask the buyer these questions, like how much do you want to put down in escrow? Do you have a title company? So I'll usually ask those questions beforehand. Probably the most important ones is, I'll start at the top of the contract and I'll ask them, are you putting this in your name, or are you putting it in a company name? They'll tell me, yes, I'm putting it in my name. And then I'll ask them how much is the purchase price you're going to pay, how much escrow do you want to put down, do you have a title company? If not, then I usually recommend a title company to them. So I usually ask these questions before I pre-write it, and then I pre-write it and put it together, and then send it to the client for them to for a final review and execution. And sometimes they want to add a change, but I usually ask all these questions beforehand. The ones I usually don't ask is maybe like the right here in this paragraph, where if the seller's designating the closing agent or the buyer's designating the closing agent, I usually just put seller if I'm representing the buyer. And if they want to change it or do something different, if I'm representing the seller, sometimes I'll put buyer and just negotiate it from there. But how I'm recommending it is no really right or wrong way. It's really up to you and how you want to approach it with your client. You could go through it line by line with your client. I personally like to have it all pre-done for them and just ask the questions beforehand. So I usually make a list of the questions that I would ask them. Usually the purchase price, title company, how long of an inspection do they need? But however you want to approach it is really at your sole discretion. But that is the as-is contract. It's not really much else with it there. We've gone through the whole thing. You are most welcome, Robert. But yeah, I guess I'll wait for another 5 minutes here and see if there's any other questions that anyone else has. And if not, then I'm just going to move on to the Dotloop tutorial to go over that real quickly. A couple of our agents was asking for a quick tutorial on how our Dotloop works, so I'm gonna hang out here for a minute or two, see if there's any further questions, and we'll go from there. It doesn't look like there's any further questions, but I guess just to reiterate on, you had a good question, Robert. That's actually a really good one to, I guess there's probably like 3 or 4 things that I would go through is, number one, if they're putting it in their name or a company name or a trust. Number 2 is, of course, the purchase price and the escrow amount they want to put down. Number 3 would be, depending on what type of financing they're looking to do or cash. That's definitely the number 3. And depending on what they want to do, if they're financing, I usually like to give them 45 days. So that's the 3rd thing there. And the 4th thing I usually ask them is, let's see here. I think just the inspection. Everything else is pretty much, yeah, the inspection right down here. So that's it. Just those 4 things is what I usually ask the client. I don't like to ask them any more because then I feel like I'm overburdening them with information. I usually just like to ask them those 4 important things, and then the rest of it, I do the research on my own. If I know there's a condo association, I know I need a condo writer, and I just put the contract together and just let them review it. And if they have any additional questions, then I will answer their questions as they review the final offer, because I don't like to ask them 100 questions when filling out the contract. Usually just do like those 4 main questions: what name they're putting it in, the purchase price and escrow, if they're financing, is a conventional FHA that they're looking to do, and then the inspection period. And that's pretty much it, those 4 main questions. The rest of the stuff I kind of fill in as needed and just let them review the contract, and if they have concerns or questions, then I address it that way. It doesn't look like there's any further questions, so let's just move on to the Dotloop. I'm going to hide the screen here for a minute, and then I'm going to open up to Dotloop, and we'll go over that real quickly. Okay, here is our Dotloop. If you're a member of our brokerage on the monthly plan, you do get access to our Dotloop for free, and it's the full business version, so it has everything and anything you could ever want. For all of our realtors who are going to be playing back this live stream, I'm going to put a timestamp in the description. Actually, when I started this, I think around 39 minutes and 50 seconds. Okay. Because I know a lot of people are asking me about this. So when you log into the Dotloop, up here is how you create your new loops, is what they call it, which is like your contracts and transactions. And you'll create the loops here so that you could put the information in. I'll show you how our Dotloop works. Yes, Robert. All these live streams I do save on the channel. I haven't done these in a while. I'm going to start trying to do them once or twice a week moving forward. The last ones that I did were probably like 10 months ago. But yes, to answer your question, the previous live streams are on the channel. They always are on the channel. So you could always replay them and come back to these live streams and pause them at your leisure. So yes, all these will be left onto the channel for you to view. And yeah, definitely take advantage of it. Completely free of charge. You could view them, pause them, play them at your discretion. The only thing that I guess I could ask is it doesn't cost any money to sub to the channel. It definitely helps with growing the channel and the algorithm. But other than that, definitely feel free to use the videos at your discretion and leisure. So yes, the Dotloop here. If you're a member of our brokerage, everyone, you go to the loops channel here and it'll show you our loops. Let's just put something here as a placeholder, like 123 Happy Street. And then let's move on to the next part. You hit continue, Now this is pretty important for our realtors. You click on the templates here. I've created all of these templates for everyone in our brokerage so that all the files is together for everything you could ever need. I have the first category is listing homes and condos. So if you're going to be taking a listing and representing the seller for a residential home, whether it's a single family home or a condo or even a co-op, you just click this file right here and it opens up to everything you'll need. So let's just do that, hit continue. And then it would probably show us to, actually let's just go back real quick because it's probably gonna open up a whole nother category and we won't be able to come back here easily. So we have the listing homes and condos. This is if you need your listing contracts for listing residential properties. I have the buying residential folder for if you're ever representing a buyer. It has the as-is contract in there, all the addendums, everything you can need when representing a buyer for residential property. I have residential rentals. The residential rentals folder has everything for working with the landlord or the tenant, listing contracts for taking a listing for rentals, and also the FAR residential leases and contracted leases, and a couple of in-house forms for representing tenants with rentals. Also have a category in here for listing vacant land. If you're gonna, there's a separate contract when you're gonna be listing vacant land with the, with the seller. So you use the vacant land contract. It has also in here the vacant land contract for representing buyers. And then I also have another category in here for commercial assets. If you need the commercial properties for listing them, listing commercial properties or buying commercial properties, and a couple of other addendums and things you may need for commercial assets. That's pretty much it. I can't think of any other folders that I would need in here. There is like agricultural real estate that I could put in there, but this is what I have for now. It covers like 90% of everything realtors are doing. So let's just go ahead and go through let's go through the listing homes and condos, because this is a pretty common one that we have. People put up new listings. You can upload a photo here, hit done, and it creates the loop. And it's automatically saved to your profile. And then you have it here. You could change it to the different categories if you want. The status of it, you could change it to a pre-listing under contract, so it's all organized. You can enter the price range. But let's go ahead and view the loop. And then from here, I have, as you can see, let me zoom in a little bit. It's hard to see. That's probably a little better. I have everything you'll need for listing properties. I have the exclusive right of sale listing agreement, which is what I recommend that all of us use for listing residential property. And this will cover pretty much everything. It's the exclusive right of sale listing agreement for a transaction broker. So you click that. The Dotloop, once again, is very powerful. If you fill in the seller's information and everything you need in here, your information, you just click the autofill button and it automatically fills everything in for you for where everyone needs to sign. But this is the exclusive right of sale listing agreement. I'm not going to go over this. Maybe another tutorial video for later this week or next week I'll go over this, but you can fill it all in right here in Dotloop. And then if you autofill it, it puts everyone's initials for them to sign and sends it out to them for them to e-sign. But everything's in here that you would need. This is the right of sale listing agreement for a transaction broker. Would you like to save before leaving? No. So let's just move on from this. But it has everything else you would need in here. I do have the properties disclosure in here. So if you want to have them fill out the properties disclosure early, so you have that out of the way, you could do that. And I also have the modification to listing agreement in here. So all you really need in this folder is the right of sale listing agreement, so that you have your a listing agreement with the property you're going to be listing for sale. And if you need to change anything, you have the modification to listing agreement here. In this document, you could make any changes that you need here. Termination date, you could change the price and terms, the compensation. You could cancel the listing if you want to cancel it and not represent the client no more. Maybe an emergency happened and you need to cancel it. All of it can be done here with this modification to listing agreement form. And that's pretty much it for the Dotloop. There are the other folders. We see here. Yeah, there are the other folders. I have to create a whole new loop, but we'll probably do that another time to create different loops. So that's it for Dotloop, though. It makes it pretty much easy and very helpful. If you're a member of our brokerage watching this video, you can feel free to contact us, and I'll go into further detail. I'm probably gonna teach the Dotloop and how to use it in a private Zoom class, but feel free to reach out if you're a member of our brokerage and want to know how to use the other folders. They do have all the contracts in there that you would ever need. Everything's pretty organized when you first create the loop, and you choose one of those folders for whether you're buying or doing rentals or commercial assets. But that's pretty much it for today's stream and class. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in, had the good questions, and I'll try to be doing these classes every Wednesday, but we'll see where it goes from there. I'll definitely put something up on our social media, usually Twitter or Facebook, of what we're doing as far as the classes are concerned. But thank you everyone who tuned in, and hopefully it was helpful concerning the as-is contract and the brief tutorial here in Dotloop. Thank you, and have a good rest of your evening, everyone. We're going to close the stream.